Welcome to the Have Mandolin Will Travel podcast. This is The Lark That Sings, Romeo and Juliet, 1968. To round out my fall 2024 wanderings through Shakespeare, I watched Franco Zeffirelli's classic, Romeo and Juliet. It was very good, and I have some thoughts. Shocking, I know. Part 1. Background. Romeo and Juliet is a 1968 film directed by Italian filmmaker Franco Zeffirelli and co-written by Zeffirelli, Franco Bussotti, and Marcellino D'Amico. It was shot in Italy, and it stars Olivia Hussey as Juliet, Leonard Whiting as Romeo, Michael York as Tybalt, John McInerney as Mercutio, and Milo O'Shea as Friar Lawrence as principals. It was well received, winning Oscars for Best Cinematography and Best Costume Design, and scoring nominations for Best Picture and Best Director. Basically everyone I asked watched this film in high school. I already talked about the play at the start of my Romeo plus Juliet piece, so I won't belabor it here. Check out that piece if you're curious or want a refresher on the plot and some background on the play itself. This version is set sometime during the Italian Renaissance, 14th to 16th century, the tail end of which overlaps with Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. It's not heavily stylized or stagey. It's shot like a regular film and is a pretty straight-up version of the play. Part 2. The acting. Overall, I thought the performances in this were really good from top to bottom. Olivia Hussey and Leonard Whiting were both excellent in their first major film roles. Hussey was 16 during filming and Whiting 17. Honorable mention to Michael York, John McInerney, and Milo O'Shea. So, basically all of the principal cast. I really, really liked Hussey as Juliet, and I feel like she conveyed Juliet's turn from dutiful daughter to determined woman very well. Even in her first scene where she's deferential to her mother about Paris, she has the slightest glint in her eye, and gives the briefest conspiratorial glance at her nurse when she deflects with, "I'll look to like if looking liking move." It's a small tell that reveals the cleverness and diplomatic skills she will reveal as the story goes on. She even somehow reads as older later in the film, just on the strength of will Hussey conveys. You can see her subtly collect and steel herself after the nurse betrays her and saying she should just marry Paris. I also really like the moment in the balcony scene where she's playfully sparring with Romeo, where she almost smirks while telling him, "Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb." It's like she has immediately pegged him as someone who may have been prone to over-the-top nonsense, and she's giving him some shit about it. I thought Whiting was really good as well, but fewer obvious acting moments leap to mind, probably for a reason I'm about to get to. Part 3. The characters. Juliet and Romeo. This film is sort of the opposite of Romeo plus Juliet in that it actually biases more towards Juliet, which I think is why Hussey's performance sticks in my mind better. Almost all of Romeo's lines before the party have been excised, which means we get a stronger sense of her character than his before they meet, and this film retained a lot of her later lines that Romeo plus Juliet cut, which preserves an idea I talked about in my Romeo and Juliet piece. Mark Connor, in his teaching company course How to Read and Understand Shakespeare, argues that Romeo is not the tragic hero of the play. Juliet is. Once the spell of Rosaline is broken, Romeo is largely static, where Juliet develops as a character, going from an obedient child to a smart and determined adult, more in control of herself than her new husband is. I thought all of Romeo and Juliet's scenes together were fantastic. It's Romeo and Juliet, so they only have 4, but still. Hussey and Whiting both sold the immediate fascination and mixed the youthful enthusiasm of young love with a more adult sense of true bonding. This Romeo and Juliet felt like they knew and liked each other, rather than just being infatuated. The production did some small things to help reinforce this feeling too. During the balcony scene, just as they vow to love one another, Juliet purposefully extends her hand and they touch palms, hearkening back to their palm-to-palm as Holy Palmer's kiss meeting. This is a really small thing, but it makes it feel like they already have a shared private language, and it makes them seem closer. The timeline of the balcony scene is also fuzzier, as it's broken up by a pan up to the trees and a fade before a rooster crows and we return to the scene, where they then say goodbye. It indicates they've spent all night talking, and I like that we aren't privy to everything they've said to each other. It makes them feel like they exist outside the scenes they are in, and blunts some of the, "so this is going super fast" cynicism that comes when we've literally seen their entire relationship. Also, the wedding scene maintained the, "this could really easily have been a comedy" feel of the play. Whiting's nervous and wordless anxiousness while he waited for Juliet was great and well acted, and Juliet barreling in, barely stopping to do the most perfunctory crossing of herself before running to Romeo was legitimately funny. I liked how the scene was blocked too, with Lawrence deliberately standing between them while they craned their necks to look around him at each other. Both Whiting and Hussey's performance here was delightfully impatient as Friar Lawrence took his sweet-ass time performing the service. Tybalt and Mercutio. Michael York's Tybalt is hot-headed but not actually that villainous. I liked how the film cut back to him several times while Romeo and Juliet dance at the Capulet ball. It made him come across more as a concerned cousin than a guy just looking to kill people. Juliet is 14 after all, and an enemy of the family is trying to put the moves on her. John McInerney as Mercutio is fun and charismatic, but also has a sublimated darkness in him, which comes out during his Queen Mab speech, where there is an emotional inflection point after he describes how sometimes she driveth o'er a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, emboscados, Spanish blades, of healths 5 fathoms deep, and then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and being thus frightened, swears a prayer or two and sleeps again. Mercutio's entire mood changes here, like something has bubbled up, or he's accidentally dredged up something in himself he wishes he'd left buried. Perhaps he was a soldier himself? It's not exactly relevant to anything, but it gives him an inner world, which again, makes him feel like he exists outside of the scenes he's in. He's also kind of a dick, which is definitely a supported read of the playtext. His messing with the nurse takes on kind of a nasty edge, especially when she clearly isn't amused and thinks it's not exactly all in good fun. Tybalt and Mercutio's pivotal Act 3 Scene 1 conversation is worth some examination in detail, which I'll get to later, but for now suffice it to say it was really interesting and well played by both actors. Friar Lawrence. Milo O'Shea's Friar Lawrence is a fun, pugnacious take on the character. He's really no nonsense and very much not having Romeo's bullshit when he first appears. I like how Lawrence is completely dismissive of Romeo's new determination to marry Juliet, but then has a long pause where he realizes it could end the feud. I like how O'Shea played that pause. He may not believe Romeo has found his true love, and he might not even care all that much, but some good could come of this. This friar is rather forceful and really takes no crap from anyone. When Romeo is having a post-exile freakout, Lawrence just smacks him. Romeo's dialogue in the scene is heavily cut. Maybe Lawrence slapped the blank verse right out of him. There's a good moment when Juliet visits the friar after she learns of her impending marriage to Paris, where Lawrence sees the medicinal flowers on his desk, and you can see the idea for the sleeping potion come to him. O'Shea is really good here. It's like you can see his wheels turning. The way this is framed makes his plan feel like a desperate and improvised gamble, rather than a weirdly elaborate plot he had ready-made just in case this particular situation came up. There's also a nice small moment where Lawrence briefly smiles at Juliet's funeral before realizing he shouldn't. This production in general is full of these small details that really aid the story. In this version, like Romeo plus Juliet, Romeo's servant Balthazar sees Juliet's funeral and runs to tell Romeo, but this production was wise enough to not have Lawrence see him. Recall that in Romeo plus Juliet, Balthazar makes a big dramatic entrance, and Lawrence looks right at him and then does not react at all to him running off, either in the moment or apparently after the fact. It's a big dramatic visual, but it makes Lawrence look like a complete idiot. Some small stuff. There's definitely some subtext that old Capulet and Lady Capulet's relationship is quietly strained. There's this sort of coiled tension between them. The reason isn't ever made clear, and it isn't really relevant to anything, but these little touches make them feel like real people. Benvolio is massively de-emphasized in this film, being basically a glorified extra. His absence doesn't really stick out in a dramatic sense. If you know the play decently well, you might intellectually notice he's not really present, but the story doesn't particularly suffer for it. He doesn't have a whole lot to do after Act 1 in the playtext anyway. Part 4, Act 3, Scene 1. As I mentioned earlier, this film's Act 3, Scene 1, the scene that sets the tragedy in motion, was really interesting. It begins as normal, with Mercutio and Benvolio in a piazza on a very hot day being approached by Tybalt, who is looking to challenge Romeo to a duel. Mercutio, sitting in the fountain to cool off, throws some verbal jabs at Tybalt, who doesn't pay him much mind. When Romeo appears and Tybalt challenges him, Romeo tries to placate him with, "I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou can devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own heart, be satisfied." He then shakes Tybalt's hand. What I think is cool here is that none of the characters really know what to make of this odd reaction, and seem to think Romeo is mocking Tybalt, which of course he isn't. Tybalt responds by holding out the hand Romeo touched, smelling it, and making a big show of disgust before washing his hand off in the fountain where Mercutio is sitting. Tybalt laughs at them, splashes Mercutio, and then turns to leave. Mercutio then draws on him, which brings Tybalt back. So in this version, the confrontation that dooms everyone is pretty clearly Mercutio's fault. Tybalt was leaving, and seemingly content with publicly insulting Romeo. This is in contrast to Romeo plus Juliet, where Tybalt beating Romeo to a pulp triggers Mercutio's intervention. Neither setup is better than the other, I just think it's neat how differently the two films handled it. The duel itself is interesting too, as both Mercutio and Tybalt are kind of just fucking around. They don't seem to be seriously trying to hurt each other. At one point, Tybalt disarms Mercutio, and then after a moment of holding his sword to the man's chest, gives Mercutio his weapon back. And when Romeo first gets in between them, they seem equally annoyed and both point their swords at him while tut-tutting. They then nod to each other in a commiserating, "After you, sir," kind of way. When Tybalt later stabs Mercutio under the arm of the again interfering Romeo, he looks really shocked and nonplussed. It was absolutely an accident. And no one realizes how hurt Mercutio actually is. The Capulets leave, and the Montagues think he's joking when he says, Aye, a scratch, marry 'tis enough. Where's my page? Go, villain, fetch a surgeon. The second time he says, a plague on both your houses, is when they start to realize that something is actually wrong, and then he suddenly dies. Romeo chases down Tybalt, and their confrontation is extremely different than the preceding one. That was a sporting duel. This is a fight. Tybalt sees very quickly that Romeo is trying to kill him, and he reacts in kind. This fight is much more violent and chaotic, with them chasing each other through the streets, making wild and vicious swings, and rolling around on the ground while wailing on each other. I absolutely loved this scene. There's great acting and great visual storytelling through blocking, choreography, and editing. Part 5. The Ending. This film made some changes to the ending. The scene with Romeo and Balthazar is cut down quite a bit, and Whiting's performance isn't nearly as melodramatic as DiCaprio's in Romeo plus Juliet. Like in that film, this one also cuts the plague as the reason Lawrence's messenger couldn't get to Mantua to tell Romeo the plan. In this, Romeo and Balthazar, horses running full tilt, ride right by Lawrence's messenger without seeing him. As with Romeo plus Juliet, Romeo doesn't kill Paris in this, and this injects a little bit of wonk to the ending, though not the same kind of wonk that it did in Luhrmann's film. Other than not meeting Paris, the ending plays out like it does in the playtext, and this is what causes some issues. Lawrence tells Juliet after she wakes up that the watch is coming and he can't be found there. But why? Why is the watch even coming? In the play, Paris's page runs to get the watch when Paris tries to apprehend Romeo, but none of that happened in this version. Per Wikipedia, citing Glenn Loney's Staging Shakespeare, Seminars on Production Problems, the confrontation between Paris and Romeo was filmed, but cut in the edit, which explains the weirdness. Fixing the wonk after they decided to cut the scene would have required excising and or reshooting even more scenes that were already filmed. Apparently Zeffirelli cut the scene because he didn't want to make Romeo unsympathetic, which he definitely avoided, but at the cost of a plot hole or two. It's not a big thing, but it stands out to me as really the only stumble in the film. Part 6. Gallimaufry. I liked Hussey's delivery when she says in the balcony scene, Or if thou thinkst I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay. So thou wilt woo, but else not for the world. This line would work if delivered totally straight, but I like that in this version, Juliet is clearly poking fun at the artifice of the courtly love courtship conventions, and the general societal conventions that dictate a woman isn't allowed to actually desire someone, but must always be chaste and demure. This film cut Juliet's line after the wedding night that, O God, I have an ill-divining soul. Methinks I see thee, now thou art so low, as one dead at the bottom of a tomb. Either my eyesight fails, or thou lookest pale. I don't mind this as this speech is redundant. Like, yeah, we know Juliet, we heard the prologue. Apparently this film was shot entirely MOS, i.e. without sound, and then the actors had to go back and dub all of their lines. Spaghetti westerns often did this too. As is probably clear from how I phrased it, I didn't actually notice while I was watching it. So in short, everybody did a really good job dubbing. Side note, in film, MOS is mit-out sound, which potentially apocryphally comes from a malapropism a German director said to an American crew. Mit is with in German. True or not, mit-out sound is the etymology film people use. And in an autobiographical aside, MOS caused some confusion for me and my friend Becca when we visited Vienna many years ago. She was a film major at FSU, and I had helped a friend at UMiami shoot his senior film project, so we both independently had mit-out sound in our lexicon. On about day 4 of our trip, we were talking about how neither of us ever seemed to be able to get the still water rather than seltzer we had been trying to order. We then realized we had both been saying mit-out gas to all the clerks, who just assumed we were mangling Mitgas, i.e. with bubbles. The actual German word for without is Anna, and shockingly, once we started actually using the right word, we started getting what we ordered. It was rather funny that we both had been independently making the same weird mistake for 4 days. This is maybe only tangentially related to this production, but Dante makes the first reference, in a book anyway, to the feuding Montagues and Capulets in his Divine Comedy, in Purgatorio Canto 6. He uses their Italian names Montecchi and Capuletti. There seems to be some debate as whether Montecchi and Capuletti were actual family names or nicknames for a political faction. Italian history at this time was absolutely headache-inducing. If I never hear the word Guelph or Ghibelline again, I'll be very happy. Though I do appreciate that they had the War of the Bucket, which is objectively a funny name. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in the early 1300s, and I found one statement on a Verona tourism site that says the Montagues were banished from Verona after a coup attempt in 1325. I haven't found any other source for the latter statement. All that to say, I wonder if Zeffirelli knew all that and the film is intended to be set in the early 1300s. I'm certainly no expert here, but the costumes and sets definitely seem like they were from the early side of the Italian Renaissance. I like how rigid and prescriptive the Renaissance dancing was at the party, and how this confining formalism contrasted with the freeing passion that Romeo and Juliet were about to experience. It approximated an effect I described in my Romeo and Juliet ballet piece, where before she sees Romeo, Juliet's dancing is kind of stiff and unambitious, but it immediately changes when they meet. Part 7. Conclusion. I really, really like this film, and I can see why apparently every high school English teacher uses it in class. It's my personal gold standard for Romeo and Juliet movies. It's worth checking out. Also, it's very amusing to see Austin Powers' silly bumbling boss as Tybalt. Originally published November 16th, 2024. This has been the Have Mandolin Will Travel podcast. I'm Matt Giuliano, and I hope you've enjoyed this piece. Check out havemandolinwilltravel.com for a closer look at some of my other projects and to hear my music. Cheers, and happy listening.